Today's guest is Pauline Glamochak. Pauline has had 4 near-death experiences, and her most recent one was a negative NDE that had some powerfully positive after effects. Pauline, thank you for joining me, and welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Jeff. I'm so pleased to be here, and I'm so happy that you do the kind of work that you do, because there's nothing more powerful than the number of people who are coming forward, and the way that you conduct your interviews is so accepting, and because the range and the diversity of near-death experiences is as individual as we are. So I've just really loved discovering your show recently, and I'm just rapt to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and you are so right. I mean, everybody's NDE is different from everybody else's.
That's right. As different as our life experiences are, the NDE seems to follow that same kind of pattern, that it's a very, very individualized. But as experiences, we really look for those similarities, and that validation is so very healing. I primarily am working with people who are integrating their spiritually transformative experiences. But that only happened for me in 2015, quite recently, relatively speaking. So that happened because of a negative NDE that I finally had to accept, that it was a real phenomenon, and that, it was something that had happened to me on more than one occasion.
Well, if you don't mind sharing, let's start on the day that happened and let us know what happened.
Okay. So in 2015, I was coming out of a very violent relationship. My partner was a police officer, and I ended up being internally injured and had to have emergency surgery. Now, the injury didn't manifest until a little bit later. So it was an injury that caused internal bleeding that formed a mass, and it was a very, very difficult time in my life, and I became very, very bitter towards my ex-partner and towards everybody, really. I felt that I didn't have support. I felt very alone. I became very defensive. And as a matter of fact, even the way that I was treated by the hospital, I was transferred 3 times, my surgery was put off. I was, basically without food for 4 days before they could put a team together. I wasn't treated very well in the hospital. So that was that sort of just compounded that kind of bitterness that was growing inside of me. And I'm telling you this because I think it is relevant to the type of experience we have. And I think it's important that people understand that our internal states are important. I ended up having this surgery. And during the surgery, while I was under anesthetic, I awoke, and I thought I awoke to my recovery, and I thought I awoke to nurses trying to pull me off of the operating table and put me onto another bed. But in fact, they weren't nurses at all. I opened my eyes and they were pulling me. So I was sitting up from my body, and they were to my right side, and there were 3 figures. One had dark curly hair, I remember that, and very clearly. And they were just saying, "Come on, come with me, come with us, come with us." we're here to help you. And I'm like, I can't come with you. I've just had this surgery. And I looked down and I could see all of the surgeons. And, but I didn't sort of click, because I still thought that I was, in my mind, I thought that I was coming out of anesthetic. So I really didn't click that it was a near-death experience at that point. But as I resisted, I saw that their faces became quite malevolent, and they became more insistent and just aggressive with the way that they were pulling me and insisting. And I could see that they were displeased that I was resisting. And so at that stage, because I'd had other near-death experiences, I realised. I looked again and I saw the doctors all in a kerfuffle around the foot of my bed, and the nurses, and there were 3 or 4 doctors and 2 or 3 nurses, and it was just a packed operating theatre. And there were complications with the surgery, I later learned. But I'm not going to go into the gory details of all of that. But yeah, so I realised that I was having a near-death experience, and I just said, I'm not going with you, I'm waiting for Jesus Christ. Because my other near-death experience was with Jesus. And so as soon as I said that, they released me, and I was back in the blackness. And I awoke in the recovery theatre, in the recovery room, and I knew, as soon as I awoke, I knew that I'd had a near-death experience and that it was real. What's more, when I awoke from this surgery, even though it was a very traumatic surgery, and there had to be 3 specialists there, and things went wrong, I saw everybody as being absolutely glowingly, pearlescently beautiful. And this is something, again, that confirmed that I just had another near-death experience, because when I had my near-death experience as a child, I saw in my life review, Jesus showed me how he sees everybody. So I understood then that I was seeing everybody the way that Jesus sees them, and that I could see everybody's inner beauty. And I wasn't shy about, I didn't really care what people thought. I wasn't shy about telling the doctors when they came in. It was just like, oh my goodness, you're also, I couldn't get over how beautiful. It took a while for that to settle down, of how beautiful everybody looked. And the thing was that those who were spiritually attuned also saw me in that way, and they knew that I was in that kind of state of grace. This is, I know that there are probably more religious terms or spiritual terms to use, but I can only describe it as a state of grace, because I could, the way that I could perceive people was so open-hearted, and so it's hard to describe, but I just saw everybody as profoundly beautiful. And people responded to that kind of energy from a long way away. But yeah, I had to go for a follow-up surgery, and at that stage I had a nurse, as things would happen, who was also very much spiritually attuned, and a very an adorer of Christ, as I call us. She recognized that I was in that state, and she called the spiritual counselor of the hospital, who, after half an hour of speaking with me, offered me a job. So, these things don't happen, that you go in for surgery and you're offered a job as a spiritual counselor within the major hospital, city hospital, So it was this state of grace that that lasted for a beautiful period of time. But yeah, after I came home and in recovery, and I sat at the keyboard, and I looked up things like just looked up things of my 11-year-old near-death experience, like pictures from space, things that I'd not been so interested in. And I just began to receive confirmation after confirmation that my 11-year-old experience was true. And as those barriers broke down within me to the barriers that I'd mentally put up against my near-death experiences, they broke down, more and more of the gifts of my near-death experience opened up, and I came to accept and start to talk about my encounter with Christ as an 11-year-old.
Before we move on to that one, can you tell me again what those beings look like that were trying to get you to go with them?
Look, initially they looked like nurses. They just looked like normal people, ordinary people. But as I resisted, and their colouring changed as they sort of revealed themselves to me as I resisted them. Again, I felt like it was, that my mind had put an assumption that they were nurses. And as I began to, now this might make sense to you as I talk about my 11-year-old near-death experience, because there's this kind of getting your mind out of the way, the earthly mind that is full of preconceived ideas and all of that. As that fell away, my presumption that it was a nurse, as I realized that it wasn't, because it didn't make sense what they were doing, then they turned grey, sort of grey looking. That's the only way I can describe it. They were grey.
Would you say they're still human looking but gray, or just even not human looking anymore?
No, they were still human looking, because I was very fast to say, I'm not going with you. I'm waiting for Jesus Christ. That was a very, when that penny dropped, I immediately said that.
In the beginning, you mentioned that you had been bitter. Do you think your bitterness attributed to you encountering those beings?
Absolutely.
And why why is that, do you think?
Because I had a deficit of love. I had, a terrible thing happen to me, but I wasn't willing to, at that stage, I wasn't in a place to let go of that bitterness. I wasn't at that stage ready to let go of the hurt. I was still hurting very much and still being further hurt by the mistreatment by the hospital staff, and just the way that my everything was handled. Even with the surgery, I asked them, please open me up. Don't do any kind of endoscopic. Just open me up and take, because there were adhesions and what have you. It ended up being blunt force trauma that caused an ovarian torsion. But the mass that formed around that torsion had adhered to my appendix and my intestines, and got ugly.
Right.
And and so they weren't, they sort of had to assemble quite a team of specialists.
Okay, yeah, it's probably a lot of scar tissue buildup, and it just all got one big mass of stuff there.
Mess, a big massive mess. But yeah, it was definitely the bitterness within me. I was pretty much consumed by that because I was a victim of horrific violence, and if we don't get the support that we need in a timely way, that can set in, that kind of um, disposition.
I think it's amazing that you are able to understand what's going on. And I've done over 100 of these NDE podcasts, and I think you're the first guest that really understood their state of being and appears to say that the way that their NDE happened was due to their state of being. And it's something that I'm going to kind of keep in mind for further NDE podcasts, is kind of finding out what the person's state of being was before that. Some of them are things that you can't really, some people are just in complete accidents, getting hit by buses or cars or whatever. And it was just something that just boom, happened quickly.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I don't know how much the state of being will always be affected. Maybe it always does. I don't know. But I'm glad that we talked about it.
I think it does. I think it does affect the experience that we have, whether that effect is just initial and as the NDE progresses, it changes, which I think is the case. But certainly my profound experience as an 11-year-old, which I finally integrated thanks to that negative one, that was certainly as the result of an accident. As an 11-year-old child, an oblivious 11-year-old child, that was the result of an accident, and it was just completely different to this. I would call this a negative encounter, an encounter with negative entities.
You had this after effect where you'd see people as their inner beauty or as their true selves. How long did that last for?
That lasted for almost a year. And somebody asked me, and it's funny, we don't think about things until we're asked. Questions are so powerful in helping us understand ourselves better and things that happen to us. So I'm really happy to work as a person who asks a lot of questions, like a bit like yourself. But yeah, somebody else asked me, and I thought, yeah, it lasted about a year, and it ended when I was in Bali, and I met a spiritual, or my sister brought to me a spiritual, a Hindu man who had spiritual gifts. He wasn't a healer, but he was a seer. And he also saw that I had this gift. In fact, he told me when my sister wanted to have, took me along to have our fortunes or future told or what have you, and I'm sort of thinking to myself, well, I kind of, I kind of do that, but it will be interesting to meet somebody who is spiritually on a that seeing level. So I went along, and he said to me, "Oh, you're more powerful than I am." And I thought, well, bang, that's why you're not as powerful as me, because you consider the power in it, not the benevolence in it. But yeah, he pursued me, and he basically invaded boundaries. I know that this sounds a bit woo-woo, but he would text me after I returned to Australia and say, "Oh, did you enjoy that shower?" and this and that. And so my walls very much went up. And yeah, my walls went up, and I became much more conscious of boundaries and the importance of spiritual boundaries. So I wasn't as, and as soon as I started to practice spiritual boundaries more. That kind of, I still can see people. I still do see people like that when we're in an intimate situation, but not as I used to, walking down the street, look at somebody and think, oh, you're so beautiful. And they'd look up at me and glow and smile and as if, thank you, without even exchanging a word. So that sort of stopped once I started putting up those boundaries. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's interesting. The NDE that you had when you were 11, was that the one where you encountered Christ?
Yes. I had an NDE when I was in hospital as a child with pneumonia, just an out-of-body experience, a drowning experience at the age of 6 or 7. But at the age of 11, I had a very profound experience, which, although in earth time it lasted, they tell me I was only out of out of touch for a matter of minutes, but for me, it lasted for hours. It lasted for a matter of hours. Seeming the same feeling that we have of 2 hours is the kind of information and sensation and everything that I had during that near-death experience. So I'll go right ahead and tell you that one finally.
Yes.
So I was 11. We were at a family picnic. We were visiting friends in Victoria. I'm from South Australia. And we were going to the Mount Macedon Ranges. We were at the Mount Macedon Ranges. And I just remember, Jeff, and I still remember actually going. I don't have so many memories that are so profound as that memory of actually going down this. It was autumn, and the leaves and the sunlight through the autumn leaves and the trees. It was just this beautiful avenue coming up to the picnic grounds of the Mount Macedon Ranges. It was just magical, the light. And I remember just going, wow, as if I'd never seen the light look like that. And before the accident happened, we did go, there is some kind of, there's a huge crucifix as a monument to the Anzacs, I think. It's a war monument, I think. But it's just this massive crucifix on a hill. And it is known as, that region, the Macedon Ranges, is known as a very spiritual region. It's there are ley lines across the earth where the atmosphere is different and the magnetic field is different, and they're known as spiritually powerful places. In fact, the Aboriginal people of that region also acknowledge that it's a very spiritual place. Of course, as a child, I didn't know any of this. I jumped out of the car with everybody, and we were all, I was 11 and there were a couple of boys, and I was just at that stage of becoming interested in boys. And these guys were quite fun to hang out with, but, I was in that stage of wanting to hang out with boys and race boys, and I was playing basketball with boys and all that kind of thing. Anyway, so I was very excited to be there. But, yeah, and they were racing down this hill and I was last, and that, didn't sit right with my ego at that stage. So I really legged it and I tripped on a rock, and instead of falling flat, going with the impetus and falling down, I flung myself back really forcefully. And later I learnt that I struck my head on a rock. And when I flung myself back, I remember, scrunching my eyes, anticipating the feeling of the blow, but I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel the blow. And so I opened my eyes thinking, what's going on? That's weird. I didn't feel any pain.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I opened my eyes, I was already out of my body. And I was already looking up, but I thought, well, still not feeling any pain. And I looked around, and as I looked around, I could see my body, but now I was already devoid of that. I was already lighter. I was already experiencing a lightness of being, and I was experiencing being drawn up. So I looked back and I glanced at my body, but I was not interested, because I was more interested. I was more, interested in the feeling that I had, and that feeling of being drawn up. And soon enough, I had a beautiful vista to look at, seeing the Mount Macedon Ranges from the vantage point that I was at was just enthralling. And I was just completely immersed in the experience of being that freedom. I had never been that kind of person who had dreamt of flying or anything like that. So to me, I was just enthralled. That's the only way I can describe it. But as well as that, I saw my body and I knew instantly that everything had peeled away. It's not only that I'd peeled away from my body, but all of the encumbrances. I didn't have any fear. I didn't have any forward thinking or backward thinking. I just had the complete, being smack bang in the moment. And no just no monkey mind, as we call it in psychology. There was just no monkey mind. There was just complete observance. I was the observer. And I was my true self. I was not encumbered with any projections or any kind of preconceptions. I might be going on about this a little bit, but it was just such a beautiful, free feeling to be unencumbered by the mind and by fear. But I did go through the clouds, and once I felt the cold of the clouds, I did feel a curiosity and a fear about, well, how far am I going? I knew I was going, but how far am I going? And the cold sort of brought me into this feeling of trepidation. Because suddenly there was this different sensation. And so I realized that I did have sensation. And I looked up, and I don't know, is it called the stratosphere?
I don't remember exactly the different, ionosphere, stratosphere, the different labels of them all, but I guess you're just saying the edge of the atmosphere, right?
Yeah. I was on the edge of the atmosphere, and it was a kind of a deep cerulean blue, sort of like that blue behind me in that painting. Mm-hmm. Kind of like that, but a bit deeper. So it wasn't like a cobalt blue, it was that kind of blue. And then there was like a bit of rainbow, and it was dark space like you have behind you. Mm-hmm. And so I looked and I thought, oh my goodness, am I just going to be floating up in space? I couldn't believe it. There was we'd barely gotten out of the black and white television stage. There were no such pictures at that stage of, galaxies or the Orion Nebula like I've seen now. So it was, it was very, it was all, to see that in colour was just amazing. I was gobsmacked, but I was afraid as well. And as soon as I looked and thought, well, how far am I going to go? What's going to happen? A dark portal appeared. And just before I knew it, I was just drawn into this portal. It just appeared like I don't know what, some people would call them wormholes or tunnels, but to me it was a portal. And it just vacuumed me in to its darkness. It was a deep blackness initially, and then it was kind of grey. And I felt, even though I didn't feel a wind, but I just knew there was a sensation of travelling very, very, very fast. Because the grey was a blurring of the light. And as I realised that it was going a little bit lighter, I looked up again, thinking, where's this going to go? And I saw the light, the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. And when I saw the light, there was just this, because by the time I saw the light, it was already within the tunnel. There were already speckles of it within the tunnel. And so, yeah, I was there very, very quickly. And as soon as I was there, it was like I came through and above. And so I was in a different atmosphere now. I was in a golden kind of atmosphere. And I could see it was like I descended on this plane. But I could see first from the top. I could see them from different angles, actually. This group of people, and they were all very, very happy to see me. And they knew me. At the age of 11, so far, I'd only lost my grandfather, I was 3 when I lost him. And I knew it was him. I knew that the others were my ancestors. This feeling of familiarity, like I'd done this before and was returning after a trip. That feeling was definitely there, as well as the feeling of homecoming, which I know that you've probably heard many times. So, yeah, that was there, and they were there, and we communicated. It was like we communicated with words, but I don't remember that much of what we communicated, except that they were so happy to see me, and they were a welcoming party, and they embraced me, but they sort of fade into the background because of what happened next. While we were welcoming each other, and it was all this happy to be there, all this kind of excitement over that, I ended up looking around and taking in where I was. I was kind of on a plane. It was like it wasn't a 3D. I very much felt like it was a very flat plane, and behind me were the stars and the space. But in front of me there was a wall, and it was almost like a dome kind of thing, but there were mountains. I could see it holistically, and I could see also the wall. I could see the arched gate that my family was standing in front of. And over this wall, I saw a light. And first of all, I thought, oh, it must be the sun, But then my relatives looked too, and I could see that they knew what was happening. So I looked, and the light became bigger. It was like a huge golden orb. And it had like it was like mercury, like gold mercury, I would describe it as. And but as it came closer, it dissolved, and it came parallel to me. And as I looked into it, as it came closer, I could see that it had a white center, and then I could see the silhouette of a person, and then I saw a person stepping out towards me. He was dressed in a white robe, and he came towards me, and I just stood gobsmacked completely. Not only was it fantastic enough that I was meeting my relatives, I had because you are completely in the moment. You don't have any expectations. Things, certainly whatever you ask happens, unfolds, as soon as you're ready for that information, that is given to you. But I had no expectation that, it was overwhelming, this new development. He stepped out of the light, and I could see he was in a white robe. And as I saw him clearer within myself, I thought to myself, not out loud, is that who I think it is? Is that Jesus Christ? Is that Jesus? He's real. And as I said that in that kind of fashion, he projected this laugh into me. It was this beautiful, warm chuckle, and it filled me. It completely filled me, this delight. It wasn't condescending in any way. It was just delight. And that's the first time I felt him delighting in me. And that first instance of seeing him and him seeing me is, I can't believe that for so many years I pushed that aside. But that was just the most beautiful experience I've ever had. But, that wasn't enough. And sorry.
It's okay. I mean, that's a beautiful experience that you just shared with us. Thank you.
I don't think that anybody who's had that kind of experience would find it easy to withhold that, that level of truth. I certainly didn't find living easy while I was living in that withholding place. So it's a real honor and privilege to share it.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like that you experienced pure joy. And what came to my mind, it may seem crazy, but it's like the joy of a child meeting Santa Claus or something. But better, obviously.
It was more than that, Jeff, because it was penetrating, Santa Claus is like, yippee, I'm going to get something. Uh-huh. But it was childish joy, but it was penetrating. So it was his delight more than my joy, and the realization that that he completely delighted in me. That was, when we're joyful about Santa Claus, it's about what he's going to give us. Mm-hmm. But this was that he delighted in me,
Yeah.
A very funny-looking, odd-looking 11-year-old, awkward girl who was sassy and arrogant and all sorts of wrong.
I guess I kind of meant it in a way of like when Santa meets a child, and you talked about that chuckle and that laugh and that happiness of being with the child.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. I don't know. I was always creeped out by Santa, so I guess I did.
Maybe I should just edit that out of the podcast.
Not at all. I mean, we all have different perceptions. That's the beauty of everything. But yeah, I didn't have that same kind of, I never got that feeling from Santa. But yeah, it was just astounding. It was astounding. And when I realized, it was also very humbling when I realized that he laughed at me for not believing in him. Then I realized also that he knew that I didn't believe in him. And excuse me. So now I was a little bit still delighted, but very humbled, because I knew that he could read my me. I couldn't hide anything from him. And so he called my name. Now, I don't know if it's my own psychology, my overlay, that I am not sure whether he used my name. You have to understand, it's not because he made me feel unworthy. It was just that his love is so great that you feel like, oh my goodness, anything that is not love is not good. But I didn't understand that completely at that time. But he definitely called me by a name to him, and as if I belonged to him. And in the way that he called me, I knew that I was of his tribe. And in understanding that I was of his tribe, I understood that there were other tribes,
Wow.
Yeah, everything was like, it wasn't like here everything's about friction and we know good from bad because we know bad, so we appreciate good, or, everything was kind of a one unfolding understanding. So if something was true, then it told a story about something else. It wasn't just black and white.
Can you give me any kind of estimation or what your thoughts on what the other tribes were?
No, I just knew, because I didn't ask further about that. I was just enthralled by him. But that was information. So I knew that there were other tribes, but I was of his tribe. So I understood that, and I was very, I was very happy to be of his tribe. But just that embrace from him, which was knowing that I was of his tribe, and this physical embrace as well. It just made me feel so full of love that I was embarrassed that I hadn't believed in him. And as soon as I was embarrassed, there was no shame, or it was just the right thing to do to come to his feet. It was just like that. It wasn't something I thought about. I just found myself at his feet. It wasn't like consciously, I'm deciding to go down and kneel at your feet. I was just, boom, at his feet.
And how did he respond to that?
I was at his feet, and I couldn't look at him for that minute because of my unbelief, How could I not believe in such a love, And he didn't respond. I had my eyes closed, and when I opened my eyes again, I saw his feet, and I saw this light shining through his foot. And I didn't immediately put together that was the hole from the crucifixion. But once I did, it's like you see things and it's like, oh, okay, wow, okay. And so I saw it, and I realized then that the crucifixion was real. Not only was he real, but I guess, as a child, I had an aversion to, we were Catholic, and, just seeing that, seeing a man on a cross mutilated, and just the whole concept, as a child, I found it repugnant. I didn't understand it. I thought life was hard enough, and that this kind of portrayal, this religious portrayal, was just something that, it was the story of my religion, but I wasn't emotionally connected to it.
Did you notice any other holes of light coming through him from other places of crucifixion?
No, I didn't notice it in his hands when I first saw him and when he hugged me. I didn't notice it later on when we talked. I just noticed it when I was right at his feet. And then when I noticed it, he just imbued this little scene, which I can barely remember now. I know it was of blood and water. And at that stage, I didn't understand the water part. I do now. but I didn't understand that it was, that he was pierced and water came out of his side. But I saw just a very short scene of him carrying the cross and his blood dripping on the stone. And just a short scene of him on the cross, which I can't remember now. I can't remember it as I remember the other things he showed me. But he just imbued that into me. And all I could say was, oh, does it still hurt? Does it still hurt? I just was overcome by the level of suffering. It was just, I couldn't comprehend that it wouldn't hurt anymore. I couldn't comprehend that there were no repercussions on him. He was very much a man now. He wasn't I knew he was Jesus, I knew he was God, but there was this quality about him that was very human. He manifested that way to me that was very much a human being, So because of that, I thought, does it still hurt? Does it, how have you, how did you survive that? Or, I don't know. There were these very human questions that came up for me. And as soon as I said, does it still hurt? That light from his foot just shone bright, like blinded me. And I was transported and there was like a fog, a little bit of a fog, and I was suddenly flying again. I was flying over this atmosphere, but very quickly over this countryside, which was very barren, with just very small pockets of green. Now when I see pictures of Israel, in those days, of course, there were no such, overhead flight. That was very rare back in 1977, we're talking. So I was seeing Jerusalem from afar, and he just projected me. I don't know if I was a bird or a butterfly or just a spot, but I was not conscious of having a body. I was just a point of consciousness that he directed me to where he wanted me to be, what he wanted me to see. And he put me in this crowd of people. There was 2 platforms. There was a higher platform, and then there was like a street view, and it was quite, a contained area. There were people down on the street level who were just vitriolic, full of hate. And it wasn't just that I heard what they were saying, I could feel them. I could feel their vitriol. And this helped me understand my 2015 experience. I could feel their vitriol. I could feel their hate, their anger, their bloodlust. It was so ugly. There was such a contrast coming from that love to seeing that, and it had like an acrid quality that was almost a smell. So I was repulsed by that naturally. I was repulsed by that and drawn to a woman who was standing there. She was a very ordinary looking middle-aged woman. She looked very well worn. She was a working woman. She was wearing a veil. She was like the veil was kind of a brown color, and I think it was linen. But her gown was like an indigo color, her robes, but she was covering her face. And I remember the colors because her black hair, her hands were so rugged, but her black hair came out and it was so black, but her face was lined and rugged and aged, And so that really stood out to me, that how black her hair was. And so I took in her physical attributes, and she was older. She had quite a longish kind of face. She had dark almond-shaped eyes, and they were dark brown. And this is important because I was asked about the colour of Jesus's eyes, and I didn't really understand it. I was by Mary because her eyes were very, very brown and his weren't. His eyes weren't that colour. But yeah, so she had beautiful, deep, almond-shaped eyes, and as I looked into her eyes, I could see everything that she was feeling. That's when I started to feel all of her sorrow and her deep, deep love and her forbearance. Like, she just had such self-control, but she was completely, trembling. She couldn't control her body from convulsing. So I was, I had complete empathy, and I was feeling everything that she was feeling. So when I asked him if it still hurt, he projected me into that scene, that it hurt him, that it hurt her so. So he told me another aspect of his nature, that it hurts him when we hurt. It hurt him that it hurt his mother so. And when I was back with him, it was like, no, it doesn't hurt. He was just in full glory, His glory was amplified to me. And he told me that he told me that it was his, I can't remember the exact words, but he just let me know that it was his glory to do that. It was his glory to sacrifice himself for the freedom of the world, freeing people from the law through love, and that freedom was for everyone. And I was like, for everyone? Because I knew that, well, you had to be baptized, you had to do this, there are all these things you had to do to go into the kingdom of heaven. And no, it was all just, no, he just let me know it was for everyone, and that everything is about compassion and love. And that glory, that joy that he had in conveying that to me, it was just, everything was wiped away in that moment. And anyway, then he took me by the hand and sat me on a rock. And he was to my right side. And this has perplexed me for the longest time, but now I kind of know why he showed me this. But we just sat on a rock. He sat just so close to me, and I've never felt closer. And he sort of let me know that he's on my right side, that he's there. And we sat on this rock, and as I said, there were no such thing as Aurora Borealis, being shown to us in Australia on the television or anything like that. But we sat there and watched this nebula, and I think it was the Orion Nebula. I'm quite sure it was, looking at the NASA photography now. It was just, the colours were just magnificent. But all this time I was on the edge of the gates, of the wall, of the place, of heaven. And so, my legs dangled into space, and we were just watching these colours. And he let me know that, colour had something to do with creation, and he was over creation. And the colour featured very, very strongly in that message that he gave me. But he also showed me that he was above the galaxy, and he was creating right at this moment. Creation was being made right at this very moment together. So that was another profound thing that he let me know. And then he said, look here, my child. And he drew his right hand in front of me, and it was huge. Suddenly his hand was huge in space, and in the remnant of the energy of his hand, sort of like stardust was left, and there was a book suddenly, and it was tilted towards us, and it seemed like a huge book to me. And there was some writing on the front page, but I can't remember now. Anyway, so I sat next to him, and I thought, he's going to teach me. He's going to be teaching me something now. And the book just started to flick, and it was like one of those old films, everything was in freeze frame kind of thing, but it was, like the old fashioned films without the silent movies,
Mm-hmm.
And I've since heard about Planck theory, which says that everything occurs in slides, sort of like an old-fashioned movie. It's a scientific theory. I just heard that, I think, a month ago, and I thought, wow, well, that really corresponds with my life review.
Mm-hmm.
So he was giving me a life review. Of course, I'd never heard of any such thing. I thought he was going to read me a story. So I became, again, my mind was sort of thinking what was going to happen. But in this story, I saw these people, they were beautiful people, and they were loving this beautiful child. And it was just these beautiful scenes of love in this life. And then it came to a scene where this beautiful child caused pain to another person. She was only a little girl, and the other child was also a little bit older, but she was also a child. And then I recognized the scene, and I realized that it was my life story. Anyway, I later on took this person that was in this scene, I took her to be my godmother. So I took Lydia to be my godmother afterwards when I came back. But yeah, he showed me this, and I was really embarrassed that I'd hurt her, because in his love, anything that was not of love was like, you didn't want to be it. Anyway, so I turned around to him and I said, well, I don't understand, because what's this life about? It was a tit for tat thing. She'd hurt me, and then I said something very hurtful back to her. So I kind of thought, well, if that's not right, me defending myself, what's this life about? How can I do life right? And he said, life is about love. And I said, oh, but that's not how it works down there. That's not how it works. That's, nobody lives like that. I can't live like that if nobody else follows those rules. And he just looked at me and smiled. And he kind of giggled, he kind of laughed a little bit, like, I can't live like that if nobody else lives like that. Mm-hmm. And then he started telling me about my free will, and how I could have anything I wanted. I could make anything I wanted of my life with my focus. So whatever I focused on was what I would manifest in my life. And this was huge news to me. But of course, that let me know also that I wasn't going to stay with him. And so I begged him to stay. And I really got upset about being parted from him. And he said, I'll never leave you. I'll always be with you. When I came back, everybody else's unbelief influenced my unbelief, and I fell into the paradigm or the zeitgeist of my environment, So he told me he'll never leave me, but I still didn't want to leave. And of course, because he told me about my freedom of choice, now he couldn't tell me that I had to go back. So he presented these two scenes, and he told me some information. But he presented these two scenes. One was of this beautiful young man, and who ended up being my son. It was the love that came from this young man was just, I knew that I'd have the kind of love in my life that I really longed for. And I knew that he loved me profoundly. And being 11, I was very, looking forward to, growing up and having my own marriage and family and blah, blah, blah. And so I thought to myself, oh, that must be my husband, And he just smiled at me. As soon as I thought that, he smiled at me, but he didn't give any information. He could do that. He could withhold information, but I couldn't withhold information from him. So he just smiled at me. And then he showed me another scene where I was talking to a large crowd of people. And I said, wow, that looks like quite a life. And I was already an older person, and my hair was grey. And I said, that looks like an amazing life. And for a split second there was sadness in his eyes. But then he said, yes, it is an amazing life. And I noticed that sadness, and I thought, no, I want to go back, and I don't want there to be any kind of sadness for him about my life. I will go back. And as soon as I decided in myself, I was back in my body. And I was back in my body. It was very quick. It was though he's just pushed me, and I was just back in the tunnel, but it was much quicker going back in than I was coming out. Yeah. And he was no longer there, and I was just in pain. There was a beagle had come along and was licking my right temple. I was laying down and had struck my head on a rock, and this beagle, this dog, and at that stage I was quite afraid of dogs, and he was just licking my temple. He'd come from absolutely nowhere, and I could just hear from the distance all these people panicked and running, and and I was thinking, what's all the kerfuffle about, and who are these people? And yeah, I had complete amnesia. But they're telling me, I'm saying I'm completely confused, but I told them immediately, Jesus is real. Jesus is real. You have to know Jesus is real. And I told them my near-death experience. And so they put me in the back of the car, and they took me straight to the nearest doctor, who basically said, this is right temporal lobe brain damage, and this is something that happens when there's when there's trauma to the brain, and we just have to keep an eye on her for that, and she might need to go and have more exploratory tests done. Just keep an eye on her, don't let her fall asleep, blah 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 blah. And so it was just made very clear to me. My memory returned, 4 hours later or so. My mum tells me now it was about 4 hours or so. It was disbelieved, and I was really just, knew that I would be labelled kooky, and that I already was kind of different now that I knew this, and that no one believed me. And look, this guy in a white coat told me it was brain damage and it didn't happen. And here I am back in the land of earthly living, and earthly living says it didn't happen. So what to do with that?
I mean, that was an amazing experience you had, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure and privilege and honor to share it. I hope that my sharing encourages others, and that I can continue to support people to integrate their spiritually transformative experiences and their near-death experiences to a level where they have insights for their lives that truly help them with their purpose, mission, and in so doing help our world evolve into the heaven on earth that Jesus showed me that it would be one day.
Unfortunately, I'm on a time schedule here because of editing and processing. So I feel like we need a part 2 of this podcast, and I hope you and the audience wants to make that happen.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to do that. Yeah,
I think it would be great because I have questions to ask you. We didn't really even talk about the other 2 NDEs. And I had a podcast recently about someone who believes that the earth is flat. And you're the perfect person to ask this question. Yeah. And for the people who've been following me along and watching my podcast over and over, I just want to throw this question out here real quick is, did you see the earth when you were up in the stratosphere? And was it round or flat?
Honestly, if I was interested in that at that time, I would have an answer for you. But I can tell you that I was definitely, absolutely on a flat plane when I emerged from the tunnel.
I kind of believe that people can go to different dimensions, and you were in this kind of dimension that obviously it was flat, but then seemed like it was in space because the stars were behind you, and then you mentioned a dome over you. It almost sounds like you're on a spaceship in a way. In a way, because if you have this dome, maybe like a glass dome, or who knows, really.
Yeah, I don't know. It seemed like, I don't know if that was what I was able to see, but it seemed like a big dome world. Not like a Christmas dome, but it was just, there was something very archy and domey and round about it. But I definitely felt that I was on a very flat plane that basically had no dimension. It was like mathematically, one point to another point.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Let me switch gears on you. So, do you have a Facebook page, or are you on Facebook? And if people want to reach out to you, are you public or are you private?
I have a private page for my friends because my professional work is in the counselling area. And so I have a professional page, which is Pauline Glamochak, counsellor. So that's spelled Pauline the usual way, and Glamochak is Glamochak. You can get on there if you'd like to make an appointment for therapy or coaching. I do spiritual life coaching and trauma therapy. I'm a qualified counsellor. I also have an near-death experiences support network page, which I will eventually turn into a group. Right now, I think I've got about 1,300 members, but I share there validations and stories and the latest things from science which correspond or correlate with near-death experiences, because I've learned that really validation is such an important aspect of integrating one's near-death experience. So primarily the page is set up for that right now, but down the track I see it becoming a group page for near-death experiences.
Do you have any other projects that you're working on right now that you want people to know about?
I am writing a book, but it is a matter of editing. I think you probably know that people go off on tangents when they speak about the near-death experience, because there's, aspects of your life that you go through that correlate to the near-death experience. And then it's a matter of getting everything out there, but then sort of paring back and thinking, well, what is going to be useful to my readership? And so I'm in that process right now. But first I had to get everything out. So, yeah. Yeah, I think there'll be a series of books. Yeah. And apart from that, I also work in, I work in the rehab space. I also work as a substance abuse counsellor. But yeah, mainly my work is in counselling, and I love doing that work.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we wrap it up here, do you have one last message that you can share with the audience?
One last message. I think the hardest thing for us to integrate as human beings is how very loved we are. Our mind plays tricks on us and can think of a million reasons as to why God wouldn't love us. And it's the easiest thing in the world on this earth to be separated from his love. But if we put our focus to being in his love, we can transform situations, we can transform people, we can, understanding how loved we are. Everything comes from our fear of not being loved, our fear of this reverting back to our first fear of hurt. But when we can overcome that and embrace how very loved and lovable we are by God, and that He's for us, our lives profoundly change, and we receive guidance that we never thought we'd receive, and we allow ourselves to receive. Most of the time, our minds are an impediment to our receiving, understanding, to our own wisdom, to guidance. So, letting go and letting God is something that is a central practice of mine. Yeah.
Thank you for that message. And Pauline, thank you for being my guest.
It was an absolute honor. Thank you very much for inviting me.
I wish you the best. I hope you come back soon, and have a great rest of your day.
I do hope we speak soon again. You also. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Okay.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.